Welcome to the Resilience Files, a podcast investigating human stories of struggle and triumph in the quest to explore the true nature of well-being and resilience and discover the secret to a resilience that lasts. One of the first episodes we released on the Resilience Files was the story of Max Gleason and his search for meaning and love after tragically losing his wife and two small children when their car was intentionally struck head-on by a man attempting suicide. Max had asked at the time if his girlfriend, now fiancé, Jasmine, could join the podcast as she herself was on the healing journey, having experienced intense turmoil, abuse, and neglect as a child and young woman. I really connected with Jasmine in that conversation, and we have since become friends and met up online where she has facilitated some incredible deep breathing yoga sessions. I wanted to invite Jazz back to tell her story in more detail, as the more I learnt about what she went through, the more I felt that her story needed to be heard. It's really testament to the profound innate capacity that we have as humans to not only heal from past trauma, but to find peace inside ourselves after desperately searching for it outside ourselves. Jasmine, welcome back to the Resilience Files. And firstly, congrats, because you're now engaged and to Max, and I'm just delighted.
Yeah, it's so lovely. It's been such an interesting last few months, being in another country and teaching and getting engaged. So being back in California now, it's feels like a whole new being, which is very cool.
Well, we got to talk about that a little bit. We're going to get to that because I want to know about that. And I think people who might have listened to the podcast with Max know that we shot that or we recorded that when you were in Indonesia. And now you've just arrived back in California at 6 a.m. So it's very early for you. So thank you. And you're jet lagged. So really appreciate that.
Jet lagged, but very happy to be here.
So, Jazz, your story, as you've said to me a few times, is pretty crazy and pretty complex, and it's hard to capture the entirety of it in one conversation. But what I'd like to try to do is to kind of go to the beginning and follow the breadcrumbs that describe your journey, your childhood, and how you arrived at the point where you're at now. Because I think it's going to be very inspirational, hopeful to a lot of people who have been through a lot and feel like if you go through some of the things that you go through and that they've gone through, that it can get you stuck in a certain place, that there's certain things you can't achieve, there's certain things you can't feel. And so that's kind of what I'd like to do with this conversation. How does that sound to you?
Sounds great. Yeah, I couldn't be more with you.
So, yeah. Okay, so let's go to the beginning. I wanted to know if you could describe kind of your early childhood before the age of 7. What was like for Jasmine growing up?
My parents were very young when they got married. They, planned to get married and have kids, but they were very young. My mom was 21 when she had me. And with young parents, they're trying to figure life out as well as being new parents. And they ended up, they had I don't remember it much because they got divorced when I was 3, but I don't have any memories around it being like a rough time. They were always very friendly with each other. They were, I always geared more towards my dad. He was a little bit more, actually a lot of bit more had enough energy to give me attention and to feel loved. My mom was, always worked 3 jobs, and she was a caretaker for her own mother who had severe mental illness. So by the time it got down to me, I also have a sister. There wasn't a lot of attention and love to give. So my mom, we have a great relationship now. I have a great relationship with both of my parents now. But at that time, I geared very much more towards my dad because he, I think everyone wants to feel seen and heard and loved. That's more about as essential as safety and food and all the other, essential things that we need to survive. Like love is, in my experience, one of those basic needs that needs to be met. And then,
So
you go.
No, no, carry on, carry on. I don't want to stop you.
My parents, my mom had us most of the week. My dad only had us on the weekends and whenever my mom needed a break from us. And those times of my childhood are probably my favorite up until about 7. Like it was, we knew that our dad, anytime he had us, full attention was there. And, we were doing art classes. We were doing, very fun stuff when he had us. And really
Oh,
felt whole and complete and seen, which is like so essential to develop who you are as a person.
so then what happened at the age of 7? Because at the age of 7, things seem to change. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my dad got remarried and he had dated this woman for I want to say just a couple of months. Like it wasn't something that like we really knew her and knew who she was. And my dad was really good when he dated women. Like we didn't meet them right away. My dad dated plenty of women that we never met. And so he had dated this woman. And before they got married, like she was very nice. She was very, I remember her like playing Barbies with me. Like there was not any, major, of course we didn't know her, but there wasn't anything major to see that she wasn't a good person. And then I remember like right after they got married, she changed. Like I remember like right when we moved into her house, it was like she was a different person. She was very angry, very like, and I had never been around that intensive anger. Like, even though I'm sure my mom and dad were angry with each other, I never felt that. Um, I'd never been around
Or
such
how?
intense anger. And she was very cruel. She was very jealous of my relationship with my dad. Wouldn't allow us to have alone time really ever without complaint, and very violent. Like the way she spoke, she had 2 daughters as well, and the way they all spoke with each other, the way they hit each other, the way they, it was a very angry atmosphere. And
Wow.
yeah, it was just a total switch. And then it turned out, as you get older and you find out what was really going on within your family, my dad and her began to use drugs together, and they started with cocaine and then went to meth, and because it's cheaper, and meth
Behind.
is a very intense drug that things get very strange and weird. And she, like any predator that like lives within a home, I believe like they watch and they notice things. And I think she saw how much she could control my dad and how much, he saw that anytime we had alone time together, that wasn't okay. She would scream, she would throw things, she would, and so he just kind of distanced himself from me and my sister. We would see him. We were at times living in the same home. But she, then began to escalate her. She really fixated on me, I think, because I was the youngest. And really quiet. Like I would just get really quiet. I would never be defiant with her. Like I would just kind of curl up into a ball so that she would, it's like a survival technique. You get really
Yeah.
small. And so people don't see you as a threat or,
Wonder.
and she began to escalate her abuse with me to sexual, exposing herself to me when she could, touching her body, and I'm like 7, 8 years old. It's very confusing. And this is
Well,
like my caretaker, essentially.
no,
She's
no,
in that role. And it, they take little steps. They take steps and they see what they can do. And I just always remember feeling afraid with her, like very, very afraid. And then her abuse escalated to physical abuse. I remember one instance, we were on some family trip and she was on one of her rampages, and I did my thing where I get very small, and she was asking what we wanted for dinner, and nobody was answering her because she's scary, and was just screaming, what do you guys want for dinner? And I finally said, we'll have anything that you make. We'll have anything that you do. Like trying to diffuse the
yeah.
situation or just,
Yeah.
and she looked at me and she threw a plate at me, and I luckily ducked and it broke behind me. And I made my exit for the door. And I remember looking back at my dad and having my hand in the door, like the door frame. And she was right behind me when I turned around, and she just repeatedly slammed my hand in the door. And not, although that
Wow.
sounds like, oh, that was really awful, the worst part of it, now that I know what I know and I've done this work that I've done, the worst part of that whole thing, and I was probably like 9 or 10 when that happened, was my dad ran after me when I like finally got away. And he just said, we're on this family trip. There's other family members there. And I'm crying and my hand is throbbing. He just goes, you fell, you fell, you fell. And
And you come.
so I think in my journey with trauma, it's not so much the initial act is awful, but the denial
Uh-huh.
of your pain and the lying about it,
I
secrets make you so
want.
sick. And so I remember
Wow.
that's the first distinct memory I have of when I started my coping mechanisms. Like I remember we left and I was, still in shock, and there was no, I'm so sorry that happened. There was no, that wasn't okay. There was none of that like verbiage. There was just like, okay, we're going somewhere fun now. You and your sister are gonna go somewhere fun. We're gonna get away from that, Not even we're gonna get away from that. We're gonna go somewhere fun. And I remember we like had gotten all this food to go essentially camping. And I sat in the back of the car, my dad and my sister in the front, and I ate a whole box of donuts. I ate a whole thing of Nutter Butters. And like, that was my coping mechanism. That age, you can't drink, you can't do drugs. I don't really know what those things are, but like overeating and sugar. And it
Yeah.
was like funny. We got to our destination and they were like, where's all the food? And it was like this funny thing that I had like eaten all of this stuff, but it was like, instead of expressing what had just
Yeah.
happened to me and how violated I had just felt, on the tail
Yeah.
ends of this relationship with my father really crumbling with his new relationship with his wife, there's a lot happening there. And,
Wow.
and abuse continued, and, people
Yes,
ask
I
me
wanna I
why.
wanna stop you. Can I stop you for a moment just because you're
Yeah,
going fast and I've got a lot of questions. So I just want
yeah.
to get them in along the way. First of all, just a quick question is why how long did you actually stay with your father and his new wife? Because you still had your mother. So what kind of, were you with your mother mostly, or how did that work?
At this point, of my life, like now I'm like 10, we're still, because it's like court ordered,
Well,
going back and forth. But my relationship with my
mhm.
mom, I think because things were going so dark at my dad's and I was experiencing things
Okay.
that I couldn't explain. I couldn't, my caretaker's acting like this isn't strange. But of
Yes.
course,
Yes.
you're feeling a lot of emotions and you're feeling shame and you're feeling guilt and you're feeling unworthy and unloved. That my mom,
Yes.
in my mom's household, she was so stressed with everything she was dealing with. It was like, if you were not doing everything you were supposed to be doing, she withheld, she would just not talk to me, or she would just, she'd be like, it's too much. Like she has
Well,
to focus on what she has to focus on. And so I became really defiant. I became really angry at this time. Like I was very angry, but I was unable
well,
to verbalize why I was angry. And I also think now in
yeah.
hindsight, I didn't want to tell my dad. I didn't want to tell on the
Yeah.
one source of like love and affection, although dysfunctional, highly dysfunctional and
Um,
inconsistent. It was like the crumbs of affection I was living off of,
yeah.
and you're not going to cut
Yeah.
off your one source of
Yeah.
affection. And two,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I would share my room at their house, shared a very thin wall. Like my room to my dad and my stepmom's room was very thin. And I remember staying up, they would fight, meth induced fights till 2, 3 in the morning. And I remember just staying up and listening because they were so violent. And I remember thinking that she was going to harm my dad or something. And I remember being so little and thinking that, like, this is my responsibility. Like, it's so sad to think about. But, like, I remember thinking, like, if I'm not
Mhm.
here, like, who is going to, like, I need to be here. Like, I have to
Satan.
protect. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Becoming
Yeah.
essentially like the parent role, it's because I've asked myself that question.
Yeah.
I'm like, you had your mom's house, which wasn't, you didn't feel emotionally seen or loved. And it was a very, strict environment, but like you chose to live in Crazy Town. Like, why didn't you just leave? And I think it's just that
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
it's leaving a place
Yeah.
where I feel seen and heard. And
Yeah. I think also, I mean, for a child, in my experience of being a child, is that you're just living your life. You don't have context for what's right and wrong and all that information. You have a sense, you almost have a sense this doesn't feel right, but it hasn't been put into any kind of framework or context that you can work from. So you're really just living your life trying to survive. And as you say, it's very confusing when the people around you are almost colluding with, it's all okay, and so I guess what you start to think and also doubt, am I the problem maybe, and so it's a confusing place to be. And one of the things that you mentioned, and you mentioned it twice, is the kind of protective mechanisms that your mind gives you in order to survive, kind of the threats. And we talk a lot about this in the work we do. And what's interesting is that, as adults, we kind of teach that when you go off track, your mind starts to try and protect you. And it's got lots of patterns and ways of doing that, a lot of which feel like normal behavior to us, right? Because we're so used to it. And most of those have been established in childhood when there was either a real threat or even a perceived threat. If somebody rejects us on the playground, we might think that instead of letting a person reject us, it didn't feel nice. From now on, whenever there seems to be a situation we could feel rejected, we'd rather, we'll step back. We're not going to engage. And that's what you start to do throughout life. You don't go for that interview in case you're rejected. So you just stay in your comfort zone. And you were talking about, this be quiet, withdrawing into yourself and being quiet as one of the kind of ways to soothe yourself or protect yourself from this craziness. And another way you spoke about was, kind of binging with food. I can definitely relate to both of those. And, what's interesting is that, and I guess this is just jumping forward before we jump back. Did you find yourself in your kind of latter years, and do you even now today find yourself when something feels threatening, and it's not even a real threat, but it could be in a situation that feels threatening, that those kind of come up for you? It's almost like, like a need for some of those early kind of protective mechanisms.
oh yeah, I mean, it's like our brain is wired. I mean, we're wiring, especially at that age, like you're still wiring your brain to like how we deal with things, how we perceive the world,
Yeah.
and really, I think if you have caregivers, like when we're young, we're constantly looking for our caregivers to teach us how we're going to relate to the world, like how we're going to allow the world to relate to us, how we allow the world to treat us. And so when you're treated so poorly in front of someone that's essentially enabling it's okay because they don't stand up for you, they don't protect you, you go for these coping mechanisms that are so dark and so make you feel so bad. And the binging and purging was a big one for me until I got to drugs and alcohol. And so now, even present day, where I'm in this space where I'm the healthiest I've ever been, and I've done so much work, and we'll get to that, with my nervous system, which is really that rewiring. For me in my own journey, it was I had to rewire my nervous system and reactivate my parasympathetic nervous system to calm down, because I was living in this space of hyperarousal where your fight or flight is activated. And so I'm going to eat the whole box of donuts. I'm going to drink a bunch. I'm going to, do heroin, like whatever it is to like calm myself down, as dramatic as that is, and the most interesting thing to me is that this whole stuff is happening and you're not even aware, right? Like you're not like, oh, I'm doing this. Like even when I was eating all that stuff in the back of the car, I wasn't going, I'm feeling really sad. Like this is going to make, like, I'm just doing it. Like it is just, my brain is going that this is going to be comforting. And even to have 30 seconds of weird, distorted comfort, I'm going to take it. Like, even if it's destructive, even if it's not good for me. So yeah, to answer your question, I still have moments today where I get triggered and I have something happen and I have to choose. Every day is a choice.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because you'll work, I've worked with a lot of people as clients who have said, I find myself binging or I find myself doing this and I don't know why. Like it's almost because it's so on autopilot. It's so their mind's picking up. And it could have been that earlier in that day, someone said something to them which felt threatening, felt like it was putting them down, etc. And now their mind's sitting there feeling in this kind of state of threat. And so all it's thinking is, I need that thing that soothes me. And so they're like, I don't even understand why I'm eating it. I just came home and I'd been healthy the whole day, and then I just downed this whole thing. And so, like, what's good and what we're trying to do in these conversations, that's what's called the resilience files, is also bring these things to the surface. Because the more kind of you're aware of them, the more you kind of catch them. You can look at them, you can reflect on them, and then you can have insight around them, as you say. There's more choice around them. But I want to go back to I can relate. I have a similar relationship in my life where you can feel that somebody's not protecting you, that should be protecting you. Your dad was a person that you had a good relationship where you were seen and heard by him, but you did mention the drugs, and because I was going to ask you what changed, but you're saying like, this is, a guy who's now on meth, and that messes you up, I'm sure. Would you say that was the reason that he kind of lost his way as a parent with you? Or was he also just so taken by this other person, or the two maybe enmeshed?
I think it's in the realization that our parents are just people, like trying to figure their lives out as well.
Yeah.
And, being still close with my dad, and I'm always trying to understand people. I'm always like, why do they behave the way that they behave? And like, how could this possibly happen with someone that's like so loving to like see this stuff and not do anything and actually have no memory of it? Like we've done therapy, and my dad's like, I'm really sorry. There's a big chunk of my life I don't really remember. Like, and that's what meth does to your brain, which is really terrifying and very hard for me to like file my trauma with him, because it's like, well, how is it if you're the only one that remembers? It's kind of a weird existence, because I have all these scars and I have these, my life has essentially been on trajectory from my trauma until recently, until I took my life back. Like, it's really hard to file those things in a proper way. He says, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He's like, I know it wasn't good, but like, so I do think that it was the drugs. I think that, with my dad's first divorce with my mom, he felt really blindsided and didn't want the divorce. And so I think, as most of us do, we want love, and we want, I think similar in a way that like I was with my dad who's dysfunctional. My dad loved this woman so much, even though she was dysfunctional, even though she was abusive. And then you add meth on top of that. I think it gets all very confusing. I've never done meth. That was never one of my coping mechanisms, but I've witnessed what happens. I've lived in it, and it is weird. Like what it does to your brain, and like what it does to your memory, and the things you're capable of doing, like the things that my stepmom was capable of doing to me. I'm like, it's fascinating if you take my pain out of it, like what that can do to somebody's brain. But I don't think if my dad never met her, if my dad, he is such a kind, gentle man, and is clean now, has been clean for, I don't know how many years. He has a new family he has now, and, is really, really good, but it's, it's an example too of how easily you can lose your way, and how quickly things can just go really dark.
Yeah. But it's, the interesting thing I've seen is that even if a parent or a human isn't on meth or drugs, we can mess up really badly. And we all kind of carrying our own baggage and the own stuff we went through growing up with our parents and the coping mechanisms we have. And if we kind of saw that lashing out in anger is a way to protect yourself, then we can kind of use that as well, with our kids, etc. And so, I think part of like maturing is kind of growing up and seeing that this person who you felt was supposed to have their stuff together and knew it all, etc., was just trying to work through their own things and made mistakes. And that's where some of the forgiveness and some of the compassion comes in. I think it takes time for a child to learn that. I think you go through a stage where you just can't appreciate that. And there's just so much disappointment, and frustration.
Yeah, and I think too, in like growing and getting older and like noticing like how incredibly difficult life can be a lot of the time, and like it's not super easy. And like I really don't think either of my parents like woke up and were like, I really want to mess Jazz up. Like I really think it'd be fun to like give
Yeah.
her a really dysfunctional childhood. No, they were trying their best, and some,
Yeah.
they messed up,
Um,
and both of them messed up. One household had heavy drugs, one didn't. So even if you're not on heavy drugs, you're gonna do things to mess up
yeah.
your kids. It's just is. But I think it's that, that come around, that I'm really sorry, that kind of reflective point, and talking about things. Secrets make you sick. Like, talk about these things. And that's why I love what I do. That like you don't have to grow up in like a meth home and have abuse to like have your nervous system be messed up. Like it can take, in my research and my own self study with this, because it's really the only thing I've been fascinated with in my life. It doesn't take that much to have your nervous system get knocked off track and get stuck in this space of fight or flight. It doesn't take much. Like it really doesn't, and that's what I find fascinating, because I have these clients that are like, my life's been really good. Like, yeah, maybe my dad was really rough on me,
Yeah.
or, there was some anger and maybe a little bit of like physical abuse at home, but it's fine. I'm fine. And I look at how they breathe. I look at how their body responds to what I do. And I'm like, oh, you're kind of like me. Like your nervous system is stuck in a space of hyper arousal. Like we need to calm you down. And across the board, the people that I do
Yeah.
my classes with are like, I don't know what you just did, but I feel good. Like I feel different. I
Normal.
feel calm. And so that's why I look
Yeah.
at my trauma as like a gift. I look at it really as like what I went through, and having my system be so out of balance and so
Or
just struggle so much with having a nervous system that's out of balance, and making it kind of my adult life work to learn how to calm that down, and then see how much my life changed, to push me in this
yeah.
space of like wanting to help other people,
Yeah. I think the point that you made about not having to have had, and again, trauma can be defined in so many different ways, but some abuse and trauma in your background doesn't mean that you're, kind of living in a kind of calm state, not a state of hypervigilance. Like for me, what we've seen in the work that we do, that anytime a human being outsources their well-being to something or someone, they feel in a state of threat. And then they're, as you call it, I'm going to say it wrong. Say it for me.
parasympathetic nervous parasympathetic.
Parasympathetic nerve system.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that can happen to someone who's had a very, kind of comforting and secure childhood, but they have outsourced their well-being to finances. They think that financial kind of security makes them feel secure or insecure. It has power over them. And so, they hear a little bit that they might lose their job, or they're not getting the raise they wanted, and suddenly they're in this kind of state. Or it could be that they've grown up thinking that they need validation from the outside world, just because most humans do. Most humans think that we need people to appreciate us. Even if you did have a loving childhood, a lot of people believe that, and they see that there's someone in their world who's upset with them, etc., or they can't keep everyone happy, and so they're constantly in this hypervigilant state, etc. But there's so many things that we as humans outsource our well-being to. And as soon as those aren't going how we'd like, and even when they are going how we'd like, we're trying to manage and control them, which takes a lot of effort and a lot of anxiety. And I think the beauty of it, and I love the work, and in a way we both do the same thing with people in different ways, but part of the beauty is that you're seeing that it's not a fait accompli. It's not this kind of immutable personality, because most people you find say, yeah, that's just me, I'm a wound-up person, or that's just me, I'm really a stressed out bunny, or I've always been someone who's an A-type personality, etc. We kind of reason it away to things that are immutable or unchangeable in us, or part of our DNA. But it's not true. Every human being can find this place of peace within themselves. Our nature, our true nature is to be peaceful. And, and the more we kind of look inside, the more we find that. And so the thing is, I just feel it's remarkable that with everything you went through and the path you were on, because Jazz, like, talk to us a little bit about your teenage years, because then you went from only eating donuts to it got quite dark for you.
Very
Kind of
dark.
Will you tell
Yeah,
us a little
very
bit?
dark. As long as I can remember, and I love what you just said, like I love, like, as long as I can remember, I've always been a hyper anxiety, hyper, very depressed person. Like ever since this child, like it's not like I put correlation. It was like, that's just my personality. I'm
Yeah.
highly anxious and depressed and also angry, like really can flip into a bit of anger, like blind rage. And that is all post-traumatic stress disorder, which I didn't know, but I was like, that's just my personality type. I'm just
Yeah.
really awful to be around. I can't connect with people. And, and so with that personality type, I was in a state of grasping for anything that made me not feel like me. So, I started with pot and, that, grew into heroin eventually. Alcohol came later and, like swapped heroin for alcohol. And it was really, and that's the thing that I think is interesting because I actually don't have an addict behavior. Like I quit doing heroin so easily. Like when I was finally done, I didn't go to a treatment center. I ended up going to Australia and just going where I couldn't buy it and spent a couple months and then came back. I don't have, I have a desire to not feel me because in what I've come to learn and understand is that you can't heal what you don't feel. So these years that I spent denying my pain, because nobody else was recognizing it. So why would I? I'm just going to stuff it down with donuts or drugs or alcohol. Terrible sleep patterns, not sleeping, I just have insomnia. That's my personality type. I just don't sleep. I just don't digest my food well. All these things are like not you. They are byproducts of unresolved trauma that you're, not feeling, not living in a space of feeling. So I spent from, I want to say like 12 to 22, just numb, like absolutely numb because it was too painful to feel. I actually think like at that time, like I couldn't have felt the things I was feeling because they were so hurtful. And like, how could I survive in this world feeling those things? Like, I get it. Like, I understand that time. I've moved past my shame of that time of like, you were doing what you needed to do to survive. And, and then, it was rough. It was a really rough period, and it's so interesting because I went from, being born to 7 to being this like really sweet, open kid, and then it just changed. And it was really dark. And I think it's divine intervention. Like, I don't know what else to call it. Like, I remember when I was like, I remember looking at myself in the mirror one day after like the
Well, wait. Jazz, wait, I want to come to that. I know where you're going with this, but I want to just step back into something you said. The two things. First of all, what age did the abuse stop? Like, because I'm assuming that once you got to a certain stage, that often happens. I've seen with an abusive parent or person that they can't actually do that anymore. You're too big. You know what's going on now. You kind of say to them, not having it. What age did it stop for you with this woman, or did she leave at a certain stage?
So my dad's relationship with her, not surprising, was like always very rocky. It's like, it was always very rocky. So I remember many nights my dad waking me and my sister up if my sister was out there. My sister hardly ever was out there to pack her stuff. We're leaving like middle of the night. Like that was kind of like, that happened more times than I can count, which is also very traumatizing.
Yes.
And
crazy.
Yeah, very crazy. And so they officially separated when I was, I think, like 16, but we're still seeing each other. And there was still moments like until I was removed from her, the abuse continued. Like and it wasn't every day. It wasn't like every day this happened. It was just when me and her were home alone. There was no one else home, which was, often at night. So I'd say the abuse continued until I was about 15. And there was another, like their drug dealer friend, she got involved as well. And I think about how broken my spirit was that I couldn't say anything. That I was of age where I could have, but I was very stunted emotionally. Like I didn't get my license until I was 18. Like I emotionally, everything stunted, like schoolwork,
I think
everything went aside. So this abuse
was
continued. And I think it's just because I knew nobody would, one, believe me. And there was also, and this is important to say, as any like intelligent abuser, she had this constant narrative. You're a bad kid. You're a bad
yeah.
kid. This is happening to you because you're bad. You're just bad. Like, and that was a
Oh,
constant narrative that was going on. Not
yes.
only with me and her in our home. Like they would fight. I think I mentioned they would fight till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And quite often it would be about me. Like our life
I
would be so
mean,
much better if Jasmine wasn't in it, And this is like, at that
man,
time, this is like a 10-year-old girl.
wow,
And my
yeah,
dad's not saying no, but he's not saying anything. And so
wow,
it's fascinating to think about now, like how easily your spirit can be so broken.
yeah, yeah,
And that was her MO. Like that was what she wanted to do, I think.
yeah,
And so then when they finally split and like my dad moved into a different place permanently, I would say like, yeah, like but I still had the triggering effects.
no,
Like it was like, okay, new
yes,
home,
yes,
but I don't feel safe. I don't feel seen.
yeah,
And she would pop in and out. She would pop in and out, whenever she wanted to
yes,
and be abusive.
yes,
And yeah, it's a total mind, like it's almost like you're a prisoner in plain sight, right? Like these things can just make you
um,
feel so helpless and so
yes,
uh and when I tell friends that I had at that time, like I have a best friend that I've known forever, and she was like, I remember finally telling her about the abuse because it took a long time to speak about this. Like it took me a very
yes,
long time. And I remember her just crying and being like, you changed so much, but you just got so quiet. And I don't like, why
yeah,
didn't you tell me what was going on? And I was like, well, if your self-worth is so low that you think these awful things
um,
that are happening to you are your fault, you're not going to tell anybody. Like, you're just
yeah,
going to internalize it. You're going to punish yourself because
uh,
you're not worthy. You're a bad kid. Like if you
yeah,
weren't bad, your dad would protect you. Or, this wouldn't be happening. It's really interesting, the internal dialogue that happens.
did
Um,
you, did you, just out of interest, because we live so in our own separate realities with our own minds that are making sense of things, and then we're experiencing that, did your sister go through a similar journey to you, or was it very different in terms of how she related to all of this?
we're very different personality types. And we've often
Yeah.
talked about this, where she's 3 years older and my sister, I think it stems from like being aware when my parents divorced. Like I was unaware. So my sister was hyper aware when my parents split and divorced because she was older. And ever since then, she became the like, make everything nice. Like everything needs to be nice. Like, so very denial.
Uh-huh.
And she mentions being scared. And so I think because she wasn't actually, from my knowledge, and she's like, I don't know, I don't remember, but I have all these, things that are similar to you, but I have no memory of this. She just wanted to be away. She wanted to be at my mom's house. Like she was able to be perfect. So my mom, and her had a good relationship because she wasn't, trouble. She wasn't, testing my
Uh-huh.
mom. So she was able to be away, but we have a lot of this similar pattern. She never struggled with drugs and alcohol like I did. But very similar taste in men, very similar, like
Yes.
we have a lot of similarities. So it's like same, and I told her, she always is like, and it's always like, it becomes this funny thing where it's like, well, what I experienced is nothing compared to what you experienced. And I'm like, it's all relative. Like, how did it make you
Yeah.
feel? Like, don't let what I have to say make you feel less than for what you're going through. However things
Uh,
affect us, it's how it affects us.
yeah.
And we need to be honest about that. And,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's different, and we're starting to do work now together on her nervous system because she has very similar to me, but just different
Mhm.
ways it shows up,
Yes.
and which I think is fascinating. Like different brains, different, we all come in with different personalities, and so things are going to
Uh-huh.
affect us differently.
Uh-huh. I wanted to just touch on again just one thing, which was what you said, which I think is important to talk about, is the addiction thing, because it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and quite a controversial maybe. I'm not sure as much today as when I started to do work in this field 20 years ago, but this notion that addiction is genetic. I had actually someone at me the other day, an 80-year-old man who said to me, yeah, I was an alcoholic most of my life up until 20 years ago, but, but it's not my fault. It was a gene. My father was an alcoholic. And it's just so upsetting because, as you said, you can see that we look for these things to soothe us. And so much of this is learned behavior. Well, I saw that my father went to in order to kind of numb those feelings, when he was angry or whatever it was, he went and drank half a bottle of thing. And so that looks like we're just modeling on what our parents are showing us. And those things become so a part of our kind of natural way of trying to protect ourselves and, as you say, deal with life. And I just think it's like such a amazing thing that you can sit here and acknowledge, no, I mean, for me, it also was because I didn't have drugs or alcohol in that way, but I had what people would call an addictive type personality, but it was just because I had this kind of feeling of lack, that I wasn't enough, and that I needed all this other stuff to be thinner and prettier and smarter and etc. in order to feel better. And so I was grasping for these things all the time, and they give you this like kind of momentary superficial sense of having arrived, filling that hole. But they're so superficial that you just land up in the same space and then your brain needs them again, etc. But just the acknowledgement, even when it comes to things as kind of hard as meth and whatever the other drugs you were using, to say no, like when it didn't make sense to me, I could give up. And of course, I'm not talking about people that need to detox. The body can become very addicted to it, etc. So I'm not negating that. But just the fact that it doesn't make sense to a person, something else does, and then they can move on for that. And the fact that we all lean towards coping mechanisms or things to soothe us, the whole world, we all become addicts when we're what I call off track. We've outsourced our well-being because we need things to make us feel better, we think, because we don't know how to internally calm ourselves down and feel better, come to our natural state. So we're looking for things to do that for us. And that's just a human thing, that we're all like that, at times.
Well, we can't heal what we don't feel. And that's become such a powerful statement for me because, I mean, I think I can only speak to my own experience. But, I mean, when I tell you it was dark, especially I feel like when I quit doing heroin, I was very proud of myself. I was like, oh, I could just stop doing that and not even tell anybody. I remember when I finally told my parents, I was like, yeah, I did heroin. I only did heroin for a year. But I was and I think it was more okay, I don't want to feel. And also, will somebody notice that I'm deeply struggling? And nobody noticed. So I don't nobody, okay? Yeah. And they were like, get out. I was like, yeah, nobody knew. Okay. And so, but the alcohol was really hard for me because alcohol is socially acceptable. It's legal. Yeah. You can just, you can go do it. So I guess to what you just said, my own experience and my greatest example for this and why, I don't really agree with the genetic thing, is that I used to love to get blackout drunk and not feel anything. I used to love that. I mean, love is a strange word, but it was I couldn't stop myself. And and not every time, but most often or not, I could not handle my alcohol. And then when I got to this space of actually being present in my body and my mind for the first time since 7, or when I started overeating and binging and purging, and starting to do this work on my nervous system and activating my parasympathetic, deactivating the sympathetic nervous system, which is just flooding your body with stress hormones, saying you're in danger. You're in danger all the time. Everything is a threat because you've been so hurt. When I started to do work on that, I can drink now. I can have a drink or 2 drinks. I don't like to be drunk. It's not all or nothing for me. I can have a drink. I can have 2 drinks. I don't enjoy being drunk. I don't enjoy not being in my mind or my body. I just don't. It is the most amazing thing to me that I'm oh my gosh, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not these things are not me. And I'm not saying that's for everyone. I can only speak to my own experience and be my own guinea pig. But once I started to do this soothing work on these internal parts and calming that alarm bell system, I no longer had this need to not be in my skin. And I was oh, wow. And this is so powerful because I'm doing this to myself. I'm not taking a pill. I'm not, signing up for a guru to tell me how to be. This is, and anyone can do it. From my experience and what I've taught, I'm anyone can activate this internal soothing system whenever they need it. And when you do that, in my experience, I no longer needed the outside stuff to like be okay, which is life changing. It's absolutely
That's
life changing.
beautiful. Yeah, that's so powerful, so powerful. I can relate to it a little bit just in terms of the binging for me, which carried right through my adult life. And, you know, I'd literally binged till I purged till I was sick. And the interesting thing is it's just a little bit like an alcohol blackout. My mother, I remember, used to always say to me, like, why did you lock the door? Why did you stop yourself? Or let's put things on the fridge. And I used to say, I'm not there when it happens. I'm literally eating frozen things from the fridge. I'm stuffing my face with frozen things and loaves of bread. And I said, my mind's somewhere else. It's almost like a blackout for my mind.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then you see how you're able to get to a place in your life where you don't need to do that. Yes, I can overeat on days, but it is not in the stratosphere of that, you know, because I don't need to black out to that extent to numb myself, you know, etc. So these things are very powerful, and I'm hoping that that they're hopeful for people who feel that they're almost hardwired genetically, and because then to kind of fight that feels like you're almost going against your nature, where I think it's the opposite. I think you fall into your nature, and our true nature doesn't need to harm itself. It wants to help itself.
Yeah. And it's really, you know, coming into that space when you've never been there, right? So if you're starting to do this from a young age, you're programming your brain, you know, this is what I do when I feel the slightest bit of, you know, because then when you live with anxiety, like, would you say you lived with anxiety?
Yeah,
like
I would also say I also had a situation where there was at times, you know, just it didn't feel safe. And so I think that I was on alert, you know, I was kind of,
So even, and I have this conversation a lot with people that I share my story with that are like, well, I think I'm like you, but like, I didn't experience into intensity what you experienced. And like in my research, the books I've read, like it doesn't need to be as bad as it was for me to shift you into a fight or flight space. Like, especially if it's in a home where you don't feel safe, like this internal alarm system is so primal. Like it was set up for us when we were hunter-gatherers. So we would, you know, when the biggest, scariest thing would be trying to eat us, right? So, you know, the alarm bell system goes off, your body gets flooded with stress hormones, you start to breathe into your chest so you can run away. You know, it's a really great, amazing system. But now that like most of our problems, especially in the modern age, there's a lot of problems that happen at home. So there's no like running to safety. Like you're in it. Like, so you might, the situation might pass at home, but as a child, you're left going, there's not really a safe space. And so then you're stuck in that fight or flight space, because then your parasympathetic nervous system doesn't come in to release, you know, to slow your heart rate, to allow the breath to become deeper and into your belly, and to calm the system. Like they work in tandem. But when you're stuck in a traumatizing situation at home in particular, like that's complex trauma when it's at home, and you didn't feel safe, or you didn't feel seen, you didn't feel heard, you didn't feel loved, those systems go haywire. And it's the sympathetic nervous system that's living and breathing and, you know, constantly coursing through your system. So when we reach for those things to calm down that system and to like soothe the anxiety that we think is a personality type, really all we need is to activate that parasympathetic nervous system and to feel what it is to be okay in our bodies. And I mean, it's it's life-changing.
And I think one of the first things that you said is that we've got to be okay to feel, because there's something about feeling that brings us into the present. There's a lot of insight you get with feeling. I've seen when you're present with it, there's a lot of information that comes with it that, you know, that can kind of settle you down. And you also see that when you're very present with the feeling, it kind of settles down, and you suddenly see, oh, there's not the threat that I thought there was, you know. And you know, I think that in modern day life, whether you experience trauma in your childhood or not, as we're saying, so many people are, you know, just with addiction to phones and Netflix. And I mean, I can get like this too. I can find myself scrolling because I had some kind of uncomfortable day, you know, And so I can get into that as well. But I just think that we kind of in a generation where we're not aligned with just letting ourselves feel. People are very, and I think the world of psychiatry and psychology, because of the, medication and antidepressants and stuff, are almost saying to you, here, we can give you something to make you not feel. And I mean, that's what antidepressants did for me. They numbed me a lot. But then I couldn't feel much. I always felt like there was a filter. And again, these things are nuanced, and I don't want to be binary about these. Some people will say they saved their life, etc. But it's just more a messaging, an overall messaging and culture that we've become very not attuned. It's not intuitive for us to actually feel. And again, for me, feeling's the first step almost. It's not the end point, but it's the first step. It opens up something in us. I always feel feelings come with information for us. And I kind of feel like they lead us to almost the root cause. Well, you've got to first be able to feel, and then they lead you backwards to the root cause, what's further upstream. But Jazz, I want to get to that moment that you spoke about, and I kind of rudely interrupted you and brought you back. Because there are these moments in our life. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in other people's lives. I think every human on earth, I believe this anyway, have these moments that come which are opportunities for us to almost shift the trajectory of our lives. And what's interesting is like often I almost feel like a ship that you can just change its course by steering it, like one little bit to that way, and then it's moving in a different direction. These moments, if we're able to not let them kind of bypass us and to kind of, capture them, they lead us in a different direction. So, and we do miss some of them, but you don't need to catch every one of them. So I was just wondering, what was this moment for you where you started, you kind of say you looked in the mirror and something changed for you? Could you describe that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So I remember looking at myself in the mirror. I just looked like somebody I didn't recognize. I looked really tired. I looked really spent. And I remember that I was thinking that my stepmom had won. Like, the verbiage that she had given me, I had become that. Like, I had become this like bad person that was like not worthy of love. I think we're always all worthy of love, but my internal dialogue was like, I've become this just mess of a person, and nobody's gonna help me. Like, nobody's gonna even notice how deeply I'm struggling. Like, I have to do this. I have to change my life. And I really had to change everything. I had to change my friends. I had to change, and I got sober for, I think, a year. And then I started doing yoga because I was and I was a high intensity runner too. So even as I was like doing all these like awful things to my body, I would run for a long time. Like, I would just run. And, was very thin, and everyone said I looked really great, but I was so unhealthy, so incredibly unhealthy, and like disconnected from myself. Like, I can connect with myself with running now, but at that time it was like I was checking out and just going. And so I started to do yoga, and I remember just feeling good. Like, I remember thinking that like I was listening to the sound of my breath, and I was like actually feeling like, oh wow, that's my shoulder and that's my hip. And like, for somebody who had spent their whole life not living in their body, it was really a profound experience. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this for a year consistently and see what changes. I mean, I've always been so depressed in my life that it's kind of been, especially when you start to heal, it's not easy. Like, for me, at least, it was like I couldn't turn back to the old version of me that like numbed out, but like turning towards feelings and being aware of everything going on in my body and my mind was so overwhelming, especially when you've been numbing out for most of your life. It's really overwhelming. So I remember being so depressed and thinking, okay, if this doesn't work, I'm going to end my life, like a year. Like, I'll give it a year and see how it is. And in that year, I was very dedicated to this, just as dedicated as I was to like drinking and doing drugs. Like, I was like, I'm going to do this. And I noticed at the end of that, I was like, I don't feel amazing, but I feel better. Like, this isn't the end of it, but I feel better. Like, I peeled back these layers, and I was like, I actually kind of like the person that I am. And so then I decided to go to India and get certified. I'd already done a certification in California, but I knew that I needed to like be away. And this, happened around the same time that my dad, he'd been separated from the woman that was very abusive towards me. And I had been in this space of like doing good and like not drinking. And then my dad was dating another woman that he met, and they'd only been together a month. And I remember he came to me and he said, I've gotten her pregnant and we're going to have a baby.
Wow.
And I mentally went sideways. So at this point in time, I don't know I have PTSD, but I totally had a PTSD trigger with this. This is somebody I don't know that's joining my family, a woman that and so I'm not able to like correlate like, this is why I feel this way. But I remember like being so anxious and having my heart jump into my chest, and like I started to sweat profusely, and I was just like, okay, like, what do you need from me? Like this, and it was like, I remember him leaving after telling me. I remember me being like, I'd always wanted to go to India, and I remember being like, you have money to go. Like, you don't have enough to be like super comfortable when you get back, but you have enough to go. Like, go enroll in this school, be away. Like, I knew I just had to go. Like, so at least like at this point in time in my life, I was taking ownership, and I was like, I'm going to remove myself from a situation that doesn't feel safe. Like, even if I didn't know why it didn't feel safe, because I had been so denying of my pain, I went and did that. And that was the best thing I could have done, because in that school, I was there for 4.5 months. In that school, it was very intensive, and I got to learn deeper about yoga and about what trauma does to the body. I'm like sitting in my, my class, my yoga therapy class, and they're like talking about what PTSD does to the body. And I'm going, it's like me. Like, oh, wow, I've had that my whole life. Digestion issues, insomnia, anxiety, depression, feeling of helplessness, feeling of unworthy. And I'm going, oh, that's maybe not a personality type. Like, maybe I'm just not being honest about how painful this stuff was for me. And then in that school too, they began to talk about like what you can do for your nervous system to, bring it back into a space. And I got really into yin yoga there, which is slow, supported yoga on the ground, like lots of support for your body. And when I got home, I really was very interested in this type of yoga. It was very different from any other type I had done. And it was so about feeling in the present moment and just feeling your body, feeling the support. And then I began to add in my own breath work, like that speaks directly to the parasympathetic nervous system to activate it. And again, I did one of my things where I was like, okay, I'm going to give myself, a year of doing this consistently and see what happens. Because I just realized I felt different. Like, I'd been on this trajectory of healing, and it felt really good. I was like beginning to talk about things and, feeling things and feeling into my body. But then really when you're like in this like deep meditative space where there's really nowhere to run, and you're feeling things, and you're, tears are coming down, but they're good tears because you're finally releasing all this stuff that's stored in your body. And then I began to tell myself, feel how safe you feel in this space. And it really developed into this class that I teach now that's like so lovely and so good for anyone that's experienced trauma. And it doesn't have to be childhood trauma. Like, it can be present day trauma. Something's happened to you and it has made you not feel safe, right? Like Max, if anyone listened to the first podcast, like meeting Max and being like, I can help you at least come into the present moment. Like, this is so awful what's happened to you, but I can at least help you arrive in the present moment so you can then look back on your pain and your trauma and go, that's there, and it is painful, and it's not going anywhere, but it's there, and I am here in the present space. And I can't tell you how powerful that is, to arrive in the present moment and be able to differentiate, like, that bad thing has passed. It's not forgotten. It's always going to be a part of me. It's always going to be a part of any of my clients that have serious stuff, or even, it's all relative what they feel. But that place, and be able to like change and look back and arrive in the present day and be like, wow, that was really hard, but you're safe now. It changes everything.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I mean, we've had similar journeys in different ways. But at the age of 29, when I found that place within me, I call it my invincible summer, and it kind of came for 6 weeks and then it left me. And then I went on a quest to find it again, because I was like, how did that happen? I was in one of the worst stages of my life, and I've never felt so beautiful and so in love with myself and the world, and everything looked beautiful, and I felt so secure. And so I went on a quest to kind of see, how do I find that again? And because I sensed it was in me, but it just kept getting covered up. And I did after 6 months. Like you, interestingly, I gave myself 6 months. I was kind of living in it, and I lived deeply, deeply in it, I'd say consistently for 2 years. And then it started to come and go, but I was so familiar to me that it gave me so much confidence that it was there, and it was a place in me that was unconditional. And I think, like you're saying, it was, first of all, it was the past, that in spite of the past, I was whole, and I had everything I'd been looking for that I thought the past took away from me, and including my own personality and things I went through, was not true. I saw that was false. This is something that can never be taken away from you. But it was also gave me assurance that the future could not do that either. That the future, nothing could do that, because this was so unconquerable and untouchable. And so, as you say, it's completely life-changing. And one of the things I did want to remark, just in doing some of the yoga work with you, Jazz, because as I mentioned in the intro, that I've done work with you, for me, where it's been really helpful is that I think I'm able to psychologically, through the work that I do and that we do, it's part of what we teach, find that place within me, that I don't walk around or feel that anxiety, to the degree, or when I do, it's quite easy for me to come back to it. But there's still some resonance of disconnect with my body, so it's almost like there's still some residue of going through what I went through and the coping mechanisms of anorexia, etc., and the way I've treated my body through my life, that I don't feel that I don't get fully present in my body, that I haven't quite loved my body. And having, as you know, some of the physical things that I've been going through with chronic pain and fatigue, etc., in the last year, has just shown me that there's another level of connection with the body that I'm looking for, and that's going to be important, I think, piece to me feeling physically better. And the reason why I've kind of been a little bit dismissive of that in the past is that I feel within my own mind, and interestingly, I was working with a few people who said to me, your physical ailments that I'm struggling with, they had a feeling it was because of cortisol levels or anxiety or something. And I was starting to think, well, maybe there's a level I'm not aware of. But all the testing and wearing the Oura ring, which I wear, which kind of is tracking those kind of levels in you, your HRV and all different things, have shown no, that's not the case. It hasn't pointed to that. But there's just some kind of level of connecting with my body that I feel is so powerful in this yoga. And what's interesting is it makes me emotional. Like at the end of a session, I get emotional. I feel very grateful, and I feel very present, and I feel very emotional in a good way, like you're saying. So it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, thank you for saying so. It's and like you're so perfectly describing like that beginning stages of like coming back into your body, which is like it's maybe it's like comfortable, but like also uncomfortable. I mean, it's unfamiliar feelings, right? And that's what I think is so amazing, that like we have different levels of trauma, we have different things we've experienced in our life, but like it translates the same in the body. Like trauma connects us, it translates the same in the body. And I mean, I have clients all across the board with different stories. I mean, everyone has a story, and to watch them all get, pretty emotional. And it's not every time. It's really when we first start, and it's so funny, especially with like people that I work with in America, where we're like really not like wanting to show people how we actually feel. People start crying, and I'm like there with them, and I'm like, it's okay, just breathe and like let the tears come. This is totally normal. And they're always looking at me like, what is happening? And then by the end they're like, but that was such a release that I needed. And it's really and what amazes me that normally comes up when I'm telling people, feel the space you're in, feel how supported you feel in this space, and breathe into that. The tears come almost every time. And it's like, it really got me to believe that like, okay, this is really important work that I'm doing. Like, no matter what we've experienced, quite often people don't feel as supported as they need to move through life feeling whole. And like, maybe you didn't get that in your childhood, but you can start to rebuild this sense of security and this sense of support within yourself, which has really been my whole life now trying to do. Of, you know, maybe I didn't get it and we can't go back there, but now I can do it for myself. And then it can also enable me to like love more deeply my parents, forgive, you know, to not be walking around with such a chip on my shoulder of like, well, you didn't support me in this way, or you did this, or you did that. Well, no, I'm going to do it for me now. And it's going to enable me to love you more fully and forgive you more fully because I'm okay. And I've developed this within myself. You know, it's because we can't change the past, right? We can't go back there, and we can't do, you know, we can't actually do that. So what we can do in the present day to like essentially reparent ourselves, to feel supported and to feel safe, and then to move through life as a more whole being. You know, like that's what I feel like. I feel like with this practice and what I've learned, I'm not perfect, and I no longer strive to be perfect. I feel whole though. And it's also strengthened my stress response, right? So if you're like living the way that we lived with anxiety and living in a space of fight or flight, your stress response gets weakened, right? So everything is like, oh my gosh, like everything is going on all the time. And even the slightest bit can like bring you off track. But with this stuff, with this treatment, with this breath work, with this very simple yoga practice, you're able to strengthen your stress response. So then you can live in the world and like not be triggered all the time, right? Like that's amazing. Like to like be like, no, like, okay, well, I'm feeling kind of anxious, but I'm just gonna like do a couple minutes of breath work and see how I feel, or maybe, you know, do a little yoga on the ground, but like I'm gonna be okay. I'm not gonna fly off the handle and be like, you know, it really is empowering.
I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think it's something that in terms of when we call this the resilience vows, but that's part of the resilience that a human has, that you can learn something that changes you. And that's possible for all humans. I think in the last 20 years, I've worked with so many people, and they do this. They see something about themselves, and something that used to make sense falls away, and something more true, that's what we call insight, comes to be. And they change as a result of that, and they become more of their natural self. It's almost like that just gets covered and then it falls away, and more of their natural self is revealed. And that's what you were describing. You know, it's a human who knows when we need to have that temporary flight or fight, right? Just in that moment, but it's not a chronic state. Then we can relax back into ourselves. And that's something very normal, and that every human, no matter what we're up against, you know, that's our birthright. That's what we want to connect more with and find more, and it is available. So, you know, you're a testament, so am I, and so are millions of others who have found this. And, you know, you want everybody to find this, because often, you know, you'll meet even parents who go, my child's so anxious, and they've been a very loving parent, you know, in their mind, etc., but something else is going on, etc. But they think that that, again, is the personality of their child, you know, and it either has to be managed or dealt with or coped with at the very best. And I just kind of think that's not true. We set the bar sometimes very low when it comes to our own psychological and spiritual growth and evolution, you know. So I just want to kind of kick that bar away and say, you know, the potential for us is enormous, and that's yeah. But Jazz, a question I just had a question for you about the forgiveness, because we spoke about this on the first podcast and I loved it. There were two things you said that really struck with me. One, you just said now, which you spoke about parenting yourself from the inside, which I loved. And by the way, just to not bypass that point, I wanted to say that I believe that the love that you feel, or the parenting yourself, or finding that security or love, that's really a true state of love or security. Because even thinking that another can give it to you is a misattribution. So I think the fact is that, yes, when you grow up in a secure household, sometimes you can misattribute that that's because of the people, and then you move through life expecting the people in your world, your partner, your boss, your teacher, your friend, to be able to make you feel secure, etc. And you outsource that again. And I think one of the beauties about, you know, we always say that when you go through these things and you heal, you actually not just say that wasn't bad or terrible. You say that you appreciate that made you who you are. you wouldn't be who you are and doing the work if you hadn't been through that. Obviously it would have been lovely if you didn't have to, but you appreciate it for what it created, the you today. But I kind of always feel, I often say that when you don't have parents who give you things that you think parents should give you, you have to look inside. And inside is where these things really exist. When a person is feeling secure or insecure, that's happening within our own systems. That's happening within our own beings. And I think I think one of the gifts of not getting that in such a overt way makes you have to go and look for it in the very place where it always is, which is within us. And so I think that that's just such a beautiful thing, because it's very, very easy going through what you went through, which was really extreme, was really extreme. I'm just saying on the continuum of abuse and neglect and all those other things, that you can land up really blaming and being resentful and continually looking for those, as you say, outside of yourself, and feeling, and just the fact that you were able to kind of find that within yourself is really beautiful. It's incredible.
Well, thank you. I think too, because I lived, that time of drinking and numbing out. I was very angry. I was a very angry person.
That.
Yeah. And so I think, and I honor that time of really, I always say alcohol allowed me to feel the feelings that I had stuffed down. I was stuffing it down with alcohol, but I would go into a blind rage, and it was well, at least you're feeling something. At least you're expressing your anger, but I wish it could be more controlled and less fueled by substance. And I think it was that kind of divine intervention moment where I was looking at myself and I was because when you live in anger, you're sick. I was sick all the time. And it went so against what you're saying, what's innately us. It went so against what I think I was programmed to do, which is to love and to be kind. And so I lived in it. And so I know what that's like. And I remember saying, I can't live like this. I can't. I want to enjoy life. I don't want to just be here numbing out and so angry at people that have hurt me,
Yes.
And so and forgiveness has been such a journey for me. It's been such a journey, especially with my dad and my mom, of really learning their stories and being okay, and because at the end of the day, I could choose to be angry and never have a relationship with my dad or my mom. I could do that. I could do that, and I think people would say, I don't blame you. But I have a great relationship with both of them. They're such lovely people, and they try in their ways to be so supportive now. And I'm grateful for that. I in my own journey, I don't want to be angry. Do I have a relationship with my old stepmom that was abusive? No, I don't. And I don't, I don't have to. I would say I made peace with it within myself to understand that she was going through her own thing, and to not actively hate her, right? To not actively have anger seething through me, but we don't have to be friends. We don't have to, have a kumbaya moment where you're no, we don't have to have that, but I don't have to actively have hate in my heart. And for me, that's been a really powerful thing, because I don't want to live with so much heaviness. I did it. I know what that's like. I want to live on the other side. And and I feel very grateful that that's the path that I've chosen to walk and learn and read about, and trying to understand, how do we actually forgive? And I think to actually forgive, we have to understand, right? We have to understand the human experience and the interconnectedness of all things, and that to be in the space I'm at now, I'm able to sit with people and understand their pain to a level that I've gotten a lot of feedback from my clients that they're you seem to understand, you seem and I think that that's my gift, the gift that trauma has given me, that I'm able to know what the other side looks like, even though I don't know how you got there. If you want to share it with me, great. But I know what it's like to feel so low, and to then guide into this other space of feeling with a safe, supported way. So it's a journey.
It's a journey. And one of the things that occurred to me when you were speaking about forgiveness, I actually just ordered a book of somebody who killed their parents, and he killed their son, and he went to prison. And when he came out after many years, the parents supported him. like literally supported him and got him off his feet, even though he'd killed their child. And that's the level of forgiveness that they got to, which is remarkable. But one of the things is that I think that when you heal your hurt, it's almost, to me, the first step, because as long as the hurt's still there, your mind's telling you that person hurt me. It's pointing at that person, etc. And so it's very difficult for the mind to let go of that. But I think once the hurt gets healed, then it's much easier to kind of have the insight that you're talking about the person. You see more context of what they went through and etc. Your mind can almost expand beyond what I'm feeling now they caused, that action. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, for me too, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, but like when I went to India and I was studying there, I remember I was like, because I was so in my own pain, right? I was like drowning. I was like, it's all about me. I'm so hurt. This is my life. I remember asking one of my teachers, I was like, so like, give me the breath work, give me the posture for depression. I will do it every day. Like, I will do it. I'm a dedicated student. And he was like, started laughing. He's like, how are you of service to others? Like, how are you tapping into other people's pain? And I was like, what? I was like, didn't you hear me? Like, I'm really sad. Like, this is about me. Yeah. And he's like, go home and see how you can be of service. And so I started like seeing little ways. And it was like and I'm not saying we shouldn't honor our pain, but like I've said, I wallowed in it for years. So I had felt it, right? Like I had been in that. And then it was time to step out of my pain and connect with other people's pain, because everyone is hurt in some way. And to realize that like you're not alone in feeling pain, and then to tapping into, and then it really switched in my brain, how can I help? How can I really be of service to like use these tools that have helped me so much? Like, how can I do this? Because once you step out of your pain, and I'm sure you've experienced this with like doing these podcasts and like hearing stories and like being a facilitator in that way, like it really does lessen like your own like closed off, like, wow, I've been really hurt in my life. It really like breaks you open to this like interwoven, network of pain that we all have. Yeah. And it's quite beautiful.
But I think what you start to see again, as you said, as you're exploring an insight into the human experience, that before you've got insight into it, it looks like everything's personal. You feel very alienated and it feels very personal. And I think that what it does is it depersonalizes things, and you see like we're all up against the same thing. There's a level at which we're all the same. We're all interconnected. We all have these kind of pure natures, as you said, that have kindness and have gratitude and have love and are secure. And then what happens is it starts to feel like they're threats, and our mind starts to react to that threat. And as we think, so we feel, and we experience these feelings. And that's the same for anyone, no matter what your socioeconomic background is, your race, your color, your religion, your education. It's all this kind of, so once you see the universality of it, it impersonalizes things. And then it can't, and that actually brings us closer together. It makes you feel connected to everybody else. You feel very connected to people, much more connected, because I think that disconnect when you're kind of in your own pain, feeling alone and feeling this is so personal and all about me, it's such a difficult place to be in, and so disconnecting.
Very isolating. Very isolating. Like, and I guess too, for me, I also thought about like my stepmom throughout my childhood. She would always talk about what a hard childhood she had, and like would like get really drunk and cry, and like so I in hindsight I began to believe that like, and I actually don't want to know her story, but that she has one, and that her pain, because I always think it's like the domino effect, right? So we get to choose how we let life affect us. So you can either choose to like absorb anger and trauma and abuse, and then you can either do the domino to go exactly the same way and like continue a life of like letting that energy go forth and like, I'm going to hurt because I was hurt. Or you get to choose to go the other direction and like break you open and let love flow through you, because everyone is in some sort of pain and it connects us. And that was really powerful, that I was like, oh, like she was just perpetuating her pain. Like she was just doing that to me. And if you take me out of it, like if you kind of are observing, you're like, oh, wow, it's like kind of fascinating human beings do that. But then to also feel like I felt so helpless in my life, so powerless in my life, that I get to take control. I get to choose. I don't have to just live this life and continue to be angry and mean and spiteful. Like, I get to choose how I want to move through life. And power is such a nice thing to give somebody that hasn't
Very
had it their
light.
whole life, the power of choice.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
it's every day. It's like, what kind of day do I want to have? Who do I want to be? Like, I get to choose, and it's inspiring, it's like, oh, I don't ever want to be like that. I don't ever want to cause more pain. I want to know how I can help and lessen the load and teach other people how to unravel their trauma so that they can show up as the person they were always meant to be, right? Like, to awaken this person that's like, kind and loving and really, because if more people were operating from a space of a calm nervous system and like able to like process their trauma and feel so that they can begin to heal, the world would be different. It just would. Like,
of course, for sure, no doubt. I often say, and I've said it on this podcast before, that I used to say that when you're at war with yourself, you're at war with the world. When you're at peace with yourself, you're at peace with the world. And that's just, to me, that's just a fact of life for all of us.
So true.
Yeah. But I loved what you said, Jazz, about that. I remember reading years ago when I was kind of going through my healing and trying to read things and open my mind, a Stephen Covey book that spoke about being a transition person, and that's what you're saying, you can carry things through, or you can break yourself open and become a transition person, which is beautiful. And that's what you've become. But I guess maybe we can end with right now. I mean, you've just come back from time in Indonesia, beautiful time spent with Max, the two of you solidifying your relationship, and you've come back engaged. Now you've come back to your hometowns. It's, I guess, a little bit more real life with kind of integrating yourselves as a couple into the community, into your families. What's the challenge ahead for you? Like, what are you learning, and what's kind of the challenge for you right now in your life?
So it's always been like, because I've spent much time in Indonesia, that's always been kind of my safe space to go and like learn more about meditation and spirituality and like, this kind of these things that I've been wanting to cultivate in my life. And I was telling Max yesterday, I was like, we went for a walk on the beach, and I was like, the real challenge when you go and you have an experience like this is to come home and keep bits of that with you at home. Like, so it's like, we're like, we've changed spaces and we're in different climates, different time zones, but like, how do we take little bits of what we learned there and incorporate it into our daily life here? Like, that's the real challenge.
Yes.
And so, for me, Max is doing his own thing, which is really beautiful. Trying to grow and learn how he could be of service and wanting to get into like art therapy, maybe. We had a lot of great shifts while we were there. And for me, it was really like, I'm going to start to focus on a retreat business to build for right now to be primarily for women, and like really focus on building my business in that for the nervous system reset, for the trauma yoga, and like really have my focus be there, because that's when I'm most happy, when I am like helping people come back to their, their being that's like innately within them. That is where I feel like my purpose lies. And so really focusing there, I mean, because it's a big change, 5.5 months, in a country, and coming back, and it's also beautiful in California. Like, there's no complaints about that, but it's so different. And it's been just me and him this whole time.
Yes.
So to come back and try to fit into like social settings and everything, it's a lot. But I think to keep that focus of like what we learned, and like we both were journaling a lot, and like just keeping that, and trying to live, live the Bali life in little ways that you can here, but it's possible.
Yes.
I've always done that. I've always been like, okay, what can I take and try to live?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what's beautiful and what's come across in this conversation is that like you find something within you that you can take anywhere in the world, I often quote Albert Camus, who said, in the midst of winter, I found within me an invincible summer. In the midst of hate, I found within me an invincible peace. And he goes on. And then at the end, he says, and this made me happy, because this meant that as much as the world pushes against me, there's something within me that's stronger, that's more powerful, that's better, that can push right back. And you found that thing within you And so whatever challenges come up for you, both singly and as a couple, etc., you found something in you that's more powerful, that's better, that can push right back, which is, that's, I don't think there's anything better that we can know as, as a human.
Oh, that internal strength,
Yeah.
like that you hope everyone can build at some point in time in their life. It's like, it's unshakable, right? It's like, so
Yeah.
I will always be here and be me, and I know how strong I am. So I'm not this like weak, little girl that was, had grown up this way, that was so abused and so just beaten down. I am not that girl anymore. Like I'm so strong, and I'm so open, and I'm so kind, which is like such a beautiful place to start to move through the world. And I'm excited to see what the future has, which is, I haven't always been like that in my life. So it's nice to say that and to truly mean that. Like, I don't know what's going to come up, but I'm really excited for whatever it is.
Have you set a date for the wedding? I have to ask you.
No, I'm someone who never thought I would get married. Like, I don't know if it's my dysfunctional family growing up. Like, I've never really had this, like, these dreams of like getting married. So we've talked a little bit about maybe doing like a very simple like courthouse thing in California, and then actually doing a ceremony in Bali. It's something that we've thought about, which would be very cool. So having it be like very intimate, like family that can come and make it, and friends that can come and make it. But we're not sure, we're just a couple of days into California.
No rush. Enjoying. Yeah. Well, look, I'm super excited for both of you. You're the most awesome couple, and I'm sure you're going to do amazing things in the world, both of you. As I've said to you, I think that you should start some kind of treatment center where Max does his art therapy and his service in his way, and do your thing, and I think that could be super cool. Anyhow, that's just my 2 cents worth.
I love it.
Jazz, you're the best. It's been amazing talking with you. It's been amazing getting to know you as a friend, and really thank you for doing the work that you've been doing with me. And just I really wish you like just all the best, and just it should just all go well. And I'm sure that you're going to just change many lives with the beautiful work that you do. And as you say, just your open heart that's kind of broken open, and the kindness and all the wisdom that flows from it. So thanks for being on the Resilience Files, Jazz.
Oh, thank you so much, Terry. I'm so grateful that you came into my life.
Yeah, I feel the same.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow or subscribe so that you can stay up to date with our latest episodes.